This time on Legal Logic, we'll be taking a closer look at race and the law. The founders of this country made a commitment to establishing a government that would guarantee to all individuals the rule of law and security for liberty under the law. As the country we live in is only getting more diverse, how do we ensure that the safety provided by our legal system and courts of law is available and equitable for all?
Hello and welcome to Legal Logic. I'm Bonnie Richardson and I'll be hosting today's program. Today we'll be discussing race and the law, and I'm joined by several members of Oregon's legal community who bring a wealth of firsthand knowledge about the topic with them. First, I'd like to introduce Judge Adrian Nelson, Multnomah County Circuit Court Judge. And over here to my left is Simon Wong. He's the Deputy City Attorney for Portland. He's also the past president of Oregon Asian Pacific American Bar Association. And finally, Ramon Pagan, attorney and president of the Oregon Hispanic Bar Association. Thank you all for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So I want to start by first asking you, Simon, why is it that we're still dealing with race and our justice system today?
Well, first, before I say anything, I do have to give a disclaimer. Even though I'm a deputy city attorney, I'm not here on behalf of the city attorney's office or the city of Portland, and my views are my personal views alone. With respect to race, I don't think we have to go any further back than a couple months ago in Ferguson and what happened to realize that it's still a very visceral and very important topic, and that there are great inequities that still exist in both society and also in the justice system. And you have Trayvon Martin from a year or two ago. It seems like every year or two there is some searing event that really shows that race is something that's important to America and to Americans, and everyone has very different views and perspectives on it.
Yeah, I want to get into that a little bit. We're seeing this now all over the media. We haven't seen a whole lot in Oregon, but why is it that we're having this happen in Ferguson and people are reacting the way that they are? Ramon, you want to jump in?
I think it starts with some large case or some large event, but what will happen is some large event will bring out the institutional fractures that we have in this society and how people of a certain race are being treated or perceived to be being treated differently in the court systems. And sometimes those perceptions are true. So Ferguson, for instance, brings out the relationship that the black community has with the law enforcement. It also brought out, for a lot of people, the tension in terms of how differently, say, the young man who was shot, Mr. Brown, yes, versus how, say, they're treating the officer, in terms of his legal protections and what legal protections did he have. So these events, they become microcosms, but they shed a light on something that's far greater and institutional for us.
And I also think it's because it helps people remember that while there have been strides made in terms of civil rights that were going back, I can recall when there was the rioting and the outcry in Ferguson, it was very close to the anniversary of the Civil Rights Act being enacted, and the precipitous for all of that was the marching and the riots. And when you saw pictures that were put side by side, 1964, of the dogs being released on people, some of the looting, and also the militarization of the police, and then you showed pictures of what happened in Ferguson, they were different, yet the same. The difference were the people had different clothes, but the feeling and the intensity was the same.
Yeah. Also, I would say that, the seminal racial event of my youth was the LA riots after Rodney King. And if you think about, what you were saying about how it's a microcosm of society and it takes one event that reflects these deeper pressures and prejudices and difficulties that exist. It just takes an event like that to really kind of illustrate how tough race is as an issue, yet how important it is right now.
We'll talk about that some more later. Thanks for those comments. But I think this might be a good time. Let's take a look at it from a historical perspective. and how some of these protections afforded everyone under the law came into place. So let's go ahead and roll that clip.
The Constitution of 1787 and the Bill of Rights of 1791, as originally written, did not outlaw slavery and discrimination because of race and gender. That most American ideal of equal rights under the law did not happen until after the Civil War. The 13th Amendment of 1865 banned slavery. The 14th Amendment of 1868 guaranteed equal rights of citizenship to all Americans with the express purpose of protecting the rights of former slaves. And the 15th Amendment of 1870 provided that voting rights of citizens shall not be denied or abridged on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Despite the promise of the 14th Amendment, most Black Americans did not enjoy equal protection of the laws until well into the 20th century. Jim Crow laws enforced racial segregation in the South until the 1950s. The turning point came in 1954 with Brown versus the Board of Education, outlawing segregation in public schools. And a year later, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a public bus to a white man and was arrested for breaking a city ordinance in Montgomery, Alabama. In 1957, Martin Luther King Jr. and others set up the Southern Christian Leadership Conference as a leading engine of the civil rights movement. The landmark piece of civil rights legislation came with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited discrimination of all kinds.
Welcome back to Legal Logic. It always amazes me that it took until the 1960s for the Civil Rights Act to be passed, and now we're looking at, how far have we progressed since then. So I want to talk about that, maybe start with Judge Nelson. Here we are in Oregon. Oregon has quite a history of some pretty bad race history that a lot of people don't know about. I want to kind of start off with you and some comments from you about that.
Well, Oregon does have a unique history. It was the only free state ever admitted with an exclusion law. While it abolished slavery, blacks were not allowed to live here. And if you stayed here, there was a whip law where you could get lashes. It was enacted in 1844. It was repealed, and there's a question of whether it was meant to be repealed or repealed by accident. But before it was repealed, it was modified to a financial penalty. You would have to pay $50 instead of getting the lashes.
In the 1800s?
In the 1800s.
I wonder what that was
which
worth.
Clearly had a chilling effect on blacks moving and remaining in the state. And therefore, there's an explanation why the population percentage is low as it is today.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So I just want to make sure the audience understands. So black exclusion law. So Oregon had an exclusion law excluding blacks from the territory of Oregon.
Absolutely.
Well, let's not also forget Asian exclusion laws in Oregon as well. Rich history of that.
Absolutely.
That Asians couldn't own property. Asians were not allowed in city limits beyond a certain curfew. And of course, there was the internment during World War II. I mean, you have this type of behavior from like decades ago, and I think you still see some of the effects really even today. I mean, Portland's a pretty white place compared to our neighbors to the north and our neighbors to the south, Seattle and San Francisco, and it's like they are much more diverse. They didn't have those kind of exclusion laws, and it's one of the explanations, I think, for why we still remain a relatively white mid-sized city.
And there was not that organized effort to move neighborhoods around. With the Vanport flood and the displacement of so many of the people of color who had come to work in the shipyards, then when the blacks relocated, created a community where it's now Memorial Coliseum, it was dismantled and they were moved over to Albina in the need for the Memorial Coliseum as well as the highway. And then after Albina got to be so large, they made different laws come into effect. They changed Union Avenue. They changed what is now known as Martin Luther King, made it a highway. There was a lot of disintegration of the families, people who had lived over in Emmanuel in anticipation of that hospital expansion in the 70s that just happened earlier in the 2000s. 2010s were displaced again. So there has been an effort, not just for blacks, but for Asians, for Latinos, for a variety of groups that just has caused Oregon to be the way it is.
Yeah, I wonder what kind of effect that has and what it's going to now. I mean, now that you're talking about Latinos, I don't mean to point to you, Ramon. I know you came from New York, I think is where you were first starting out practicing. And, but so, you know, very diverse. You came here to Oregon. What did you think when you first moved here?
Well, it's interesting. Coming here, I actually had, you know, friends in New York who asked me why. And, you know, noting that there were so few Hispanics here, and I would joke with them, well, they're getting one more. So it didn't intimidate me. And, you know, I think for me personally, one of the thoughts that I've always had about places or institutions with some sort of historical, you know, discrimination or some sort of black mark on their record for the way that they treated minorities is that if they are trying to change, I think we should, as a community, reward them for that, you know, and not kind of punish them for their past. And I think Oregon is a good example of a state that has a pretty conscientious citizenry that do want to change, that do want to be progressive, but they're dealing with the effects of having that history and the low amount of, you know, the population of minorities and how to deal with that. But I just don't think, I think we should, yeah, it's growing, and I think we should encourage, you know, people to try to come here and say, look, you know, whatever it was 50 years ago or even 30 years ago, the people are conscientiously trying to change it in a better way. So it is a good place to live for minorities. They just need to engage and try it out.
Well, I think the problem is that the hipsters are all coming over here. They tend to be predominantly white, so that's
Yeah, well,
also
there is
not really
that.
helping the
Yeah.
racial diversity pool.
Well, gentrification is an issue, and it's an issue that really gets to the heart of what we're talking about with race. A lot of people are concerned about affordable housing, so you will go to an area that has a place that can help you have your part of the American dream. And what do you do with your desire to have that American dream and also understanding the history of how that neighborhood may be affordable to you? It puts each individual in this kind of a conflict in which need is going to rise to the top. Your sense of we need to make sure that everyone has equal and fair access to everything, or I'm trying to get what I need for myself and we'll deal with that other issue later.
No, you also have the problem with gentrification here, though. I mean, you have these areas, say, in Northwest Portland that maybe even 15 years ago were like urban areas that were predominantly African American, and now they are turning into places where yuppies are moving in, and the racial minorities getting displaced out further into, say, East Portland.
Absolutely.
And
is there more of a segregation that we're seeing, though, with that? Is it, what about, for example, one of the fastest growing populations, Hispanics? Lots of Hispanics that are moving into our communities and making our communities more diverse. What kind of impact is that having on us here?
Well, you know, segregation is one way of looking at it, but also, I come from a place where we call them ghettos or barrios, right? And sometimes people think of that as a negative, but in a certain sense, it's going back to a neighborhood where you feel welcome. And so we gather in places where we walk outside and we speak the same language as someone else, where we get the same food that our mother cooked for us, you know, in our representative country. And some people kind of look at that as a negative. And again, you know, I think diversity is an enrichment. And so the more neighborhoods that we get like that, I think people need to redefine whether or not that's segregation for themselves or just a gathering of a people with a certain culture, and that it's something to embrace.
Are there any neighborhoods like that here in Portland, though, in the Latino community?
I think you could find them, absolutely, depending, you know, again, when you go out east, you know,
What about
in East
Hillsborough?
Portland,
Yeah, you gotta head
Hillsborough,
all the way
absolutely.
out to Hillsborough before you hit something like that.
Well,
It's not
but
city
when you
proper.
go out further, it's easier to form that because then there's no financial barrier to creating that neighborhood. So it allows for the full, you know, range of people to live there.
I suppose.
And part of this too, I think this is going to be maybe after our next clip. I want to hear all about your own personal experiences, because you all represent, various portions of our community, and it's important to have that face. But on this next clip, we've asked several members of our legal community how they became involved as lawyers and judges, and also the perceptions that people have of the judicial system.
One of the things that really motivated me to the bench was the fact that there was for a long period of time no Latino lawyer on the bench.
And so law for me was a way to reclaim some power. I think lawyers have incredible tools to be able to go into court and change lives and change behavior in a legal, organized way. And that's really what drove me to law school and to being a lawyer.
And after practicing for 25 years and appearing in front of all 38 judges in Multnomah County, I thought that I would bring some diversity to the bench. But I thought, being a judge, that I could make a difference, especially in the lives of young African-American men that appear before me.
I always noted that sense of discomfort when they would enter into a court and see that between the jury and the judge and the prosecutor and the other representatives in the courtroom, that person and I were the only Latinos and definitely the only Spanish-speaking people.
It's not unusual for people to say to me that I don't believe the system's going to treat me fairly, especially when I was a lawyer. They would come to me and say, I'm never going to get treated fairly. The juries are all from East County. They don't relate to my background or my culture.
There is that perception in the minority community that if you come to court, you won't get justice. It's a perception. In Multnomah County, I don't believe it's a reality.
Welcome back. I'd like to ask one of our panelists, Ramon Pagan, criminal defense attorney, what motivated you to become involved to the degree that you have become involved in the legal system?
Well, I come from New York, so it's a little different for me because I think I'd always seen Hispanics or blacks or Asians in positions of power by the time I'd grown up. So for me, I visualized that it was okay, that was doable. And seeing people become judges, federal judges, prosecutors, elected positions, things of that nature. So I was, in a sense, lucky for that, and that affected me to have the confidence to do that. And then, when you go to law school, many people have different reasons for going to law school, and they really don't know the system, I don't think, that well. And I think as you mature in your career, you start really seeing how the system works. And you hope that the conscientious people, as they go through their career, start wanting to make it better. And I think that's where I am, where I've seen it work, I've seen it not work. I've seen people not have access to justice. I've seen people have more access than maybe they deserved, depending on how much money they had. And so I think that's where I am now, is I've seen enough. I've seen it in New York. I've seen it in other jurisdictions. I've come to Oregon and seen the unique judicial system that we have here because of our population. That it's made me concerned.
You mean like almost all white?
Well, no, because you know what? In Oregon still, like many other jurisdictions, one of the unfortunate things that you'll see is that many of the defendants in the criminal justice system have an ethnic last name,
Yes.
or they're black. I think the stat that came out recently that said, 40 to 50% of black males under the age of 23 will be arrested and go through the judicial system at some point, by the time they're 23. That matters. So those types of stats and kind of seeing that happen, representing enough people from an underrepresented community, makes you want to give back more, as much as you can.
Something that struck me about Judge Lopez, right now, we don't really represent all the people that are at the higher up of our profession. Judge Nelson, you're one of 2 African Americans judges in the state. In the state.
In the state, and I'm the second female in Oregon's history. And
wow. Yes. And
it's a sobering statistic when I tell it to people. They look around and say, really?
Second black female.
The second black female in history.
Yeah. And so, what does that do for people that come into your courtroom? Now you come across very, you have a very nice, warm, welcoming, but you're a person of color. How does that impact a person that walks into the system? They look around, everyone around them is white, but they see you up there. I mean, how do you think that impacts?
I've had a number of people tell me that it makes a difference. And I feel that my courtroom does feel differently. My courtroom is very vibrant with the type of art that I have from the Public Arts Collection through the Regional Arts and Cultural Commission. It talks about social issues. I don't shy away from it. I'm an African-American woman from the South who has an accent. So we can't act as if that I'm something that I'm not that I want to. I embrace it. And by being myself, I encourage other people to understand that they can be themselves, and we're going to make our system work as best as it can be. Everyone seems to understand that they'll have an opportunity to be heard. They may not get the result they want because everyone can't win, but at least they feel like the system works a little bit better with someone who reflects them or reflects someone that they can identify with. Because I've had a number of people who aren't of color, who are young women or people from lower socioeconomic status come and say, it made me feel better to see you in here.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that wholeheartedly, having been in your courtroom, and I appreciate that. I'm going to turn and Simon, you've tried cases in Oregon. You've had to go in other counties. You were the only minority, and you're the person that's up there speaking. You're speaking to a whole white jury. I think you had a recent case. We don't have to talk about what that is, but what was your perception? How did that impact your?
It was very different. I mean, when I was a prosecutor in Manhattan, where it was a very diverse, everything, juries and population, then
And office.
Yeah. Race didn't really seem to matter so much, except for if it was, they're making an allegation that you are striking the blacks from the jurors, something called a Batson challenge. Like if that was where it might come into play.
That's unconstitutional too.
Yes, it is. Yeah. But race was kind of always all around in a sense. I mean, it reflected into, say, the skepticism that juries would have against police because there was several misconduct, like really severe misconduct by police officers, and it becomes a black and white issue. Here in Portland or elsewhere in Oregon, I guess I happen to be the Asian lawyer, the Asian prosecutor who is doing a case, but race didn't really seem to play much of a factor. But I think that's partly sadly because almost every participant in the process was white: the judge, the jurors, the defendants, the attorneys. And so to the extent that it had any bearing whatsoever, it's just kind of you notice that there is someone of color on the jury, but it doesn't really become anything that's too much of an issue.
So maybe to wrap this up about access to justice, I mean, what can we do to make sure that there's more access to justice? We've heard about how you can make your courtroom more welcoming to everyone of all socioeconomic classes. What are some of the things that lawyers can do?
Well, we want people, what lawyers can do is what the citizens can do, and that's come to the courthouse when you receive your jury summons and serve. Mm-hmm. It is really important that juries are as reflective of the community as possible, because jury verdicts make a difference to lawyers. It affects how you assess a case, it affects maybe how the strategy you use, and it also affects settlement of cases and how cases are resolved. So the more diverse voices, the better. And I know that it is a personal sacrifice for people to come in and serve, but every juror I've ever talked to, because I talk to jurors to get feedback for their attorneys so that they can improve and hone their skills, as well as get a feeling for how they felt about the process, often say, I may not have wanted to be here, but I'm really glad I was here by the end of the experience. And I understand why it's so important that the community voice its collective opinion.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, we'll talk a lot more about juries here in a minute. I think there's another clip we'll watch on that. But, you know, just by having the jury system in place, that gives people access to justice. So it's not just one person making a decision, it's a group of people from our community. So it seems that there are systems in place to ensure people have access to justice. However, there's some very alarming statistics out there about the percentages, I think Ramon was mentioning this, of racial and ethnic minorities in the criminal justice system. So let's roll through this clip and then we'll talk about some of our thoughts on this subject.
In the whole state, there's 173 circuit court judges. I would think 30 to 40% of defendants that come through in criminal charges through Multnomah County are African American. I think it starts with law enforcement. Law enforcement has to be trained that just because a guy has sagging pants or a cap on, that he's not automatically involved in criminal activity, and that's not a basis to suspect him.
As a judge, I do see inordinate number or percentages of people of color coming to me being convicted of crimes and my having to sentence them. And that troubles me, and that is troubling to me. And I think the greater problem is a lack of adequate education, lack of adequate nourishment when they're children to be able to do well in school and pay attention in school, lack of viable job opportunities, which results in a socioeconomic disparity. Now that being said, the other overrepresented group of people I see in my courtroom are poor white people.
Welcome back. So we have two related but distinct thoughts from those interviews. Judge Nelson, I want to ask you, how might we reverse this trend of overrepresentation of minorities in the judicial system?
First of all, we have to acknowledge that there is an overrepresentation, and then have those hard conversations that we need to address. How does that occur? Often people are in the legal system because of interactions they've had with law enforcement, because of where they live, they may be targeted more, because of lack of access to housing, education. This is a continuum that starts from birth. There is a whole discussion about the school to prison pipeline. So there's an acknowledgement that if a child is not given the resources that is needed by age 5, you are really giving some indication based on what resources, the type of community, the type of network, the type of, not necessarily family, that child has, is an indicator if that child is going to be more likely to be in the legal system or not, particularly if it's a child of color.
It is a big concern. Ramon, I mean, what do you feel about this, given your experience?
You know, I think we have to re-examine also a lot of, I think we have to re-examine the drug war too, and the effect of the drug war on the minority populations. It becomes kind of a self-fulfilling cycle where, they say that the black neighborhood or the Hispanic neighborhood is an area of high crime, so they send more cops, so they find more people with drugs on them, and so there's more crime, so they can say it's a high crime neighborhood. But the statistics show that the percentage of use amongst, spread across the races is static. It's not that 80% more black people use drugs or Hispanic people use drugs.
They're just getting prosecuted
They're
more?
just getting prosecuted. They're getting caught more. I think the country is starting to come around to re-examining this problem. The idea of for-profit prisons is a problem. The idea of the probation system that we've put into place with drugs and those types of crimes, and kind of the revolving door system. There's a lot of kind of institutional ideas that were born out of the 70s and 80s that people thought were really going to work. And now we're kind of 20, 30 years out from it, and it hasn't made life better. And it has destroyed neighborhoods. It's destroyed whole communities. And so I think the cost-benefit analysis for those types of mandatory minimums for drugs and first offense, things of that nature, need to be seriously re-examined. And it has a huge effect when you're a person of color and your father's 28 years old and he gets caught with a drug and gets a mandatory minimum that puts him in for 5 years or something like that. And now you've completely destroyed that family in terms of now it's a single mother, now the child doesn't have a father, the financial resources are lower, etc. So I think there's a lot of institutional ideas that need to be re-examined across the
nation. Do we do that through the legislature, or is that probably the best way? I mean, how do we do that through the court system?
Well, through the court system, it's a little more difficult, but I think people need to understand that that's why that's happening. And through the court system, it's specifically, I think it's law enforcement is actually the idea.
Yeah,
the judges are doing their job. The other thing, in the court system, we need more diversity on the bench. We need more diversity at the prosecutor's office. We need, if you're going to be in a position of authority with and affecting multiple types of communities, I think as an office, if you're the elected prosecutor or as judges, we need to look at diversity as a qualification for those jobs. We need to have judges who can relate to people of different color. That's a qualification. That's an enrichment of our judiciary when they're thinking about sentencing, when they're thinking about whether or not they would give someone probation instead or not. And likewise, at prosecutors' offices and law enforcement, we need more diversity so that those people can relate to the people that they actually are serving or representing.
Yeah, I mean, wasn't that a problem with Ferguson? Is that you have a very white police force that was policing a very African American population, and then just that disparity was a problem. But it's not something that's limited to when you have a disparity like that. I mean, across the board, minorities are getting stopped by the police more. When they get stopped by the police more, they're getting arrested at a higher rate, and then they're getting prosecuted at a higher rate. And it's just like this filtration through the system that just keeps honing more and more.
And it just fulfills itself. It just keeps building upon itself because it allows another officer to say that's a high crime neighborhood, and that's probable cause, that's this, and it just kind of keeps coming in a cycle.
Yeah.
But the law is a tool, just as we saw with the Civil Rights Act as legislation, and then with Brown versus Board of Education, all of these work together to address the issues. I mean, I can tell you that some people probably can't even imagine that there's discrimination today, depending on where they live. Other people know acutely that there is discrimination, and it's not been that much movement. But the more that we are able to educate one another by talking to one another, by explaining history, by putting things in context, it gives more of us information that we can then assess when things are happening. I just saw it happen in a trial that I had today. And it was an interesting conversation to watch as they were selecting a jury about how race was possibly a factor in someone being pulled over, and how they may interact with the police because of how they feel that they're going to be perceived or how they're actually being perceived, and would that affect how they would weigh credibility. And it was just an interesting conversation. And as I have sat presiding over trials to watch how race is now a topic that is brought up, not in every case because it's not a racial element in every case, but those cases that have race as an element, how the attorneys are not shying away from the topic and really having a conversation that even if everyone's not seated on that jury, that they're better informed and they may have those other conversations, and it just moves everything along.
So let's go ahead and take a little slight detour and talk more specifically about serving on the jury.
And the reality is that if you are a minority litigant or a minority defendant, there's a very slim chance that you're gonna have seated on your jury a person of your race or a minority of any kind. And I see the reason for that is just an underlying theme that I deal with all the time. It's an issue of economics.
part of the systemic problem is that we don't incentivize jury duty in a way that makes it financially possible and just practically possible for anybody to serve.
But if you're poor, it's going to cost you money. Especially if you have children you're going to have to park in daycare. It's going to cost you money in order to do your civic duty.
And so the people that you end up having on juries are the people that have the time to sit on a jury. And so I think that the pool sort of gets narrowed down in a way. So it's not truly reflective of the entire community.
And I've found in the last few years, more and more defense attorneys are discussing race in voir dire and talking about it, bringing it up, making sure that everyone is objective and fair and impartial, and that race is not an issue, and then letting it go and move on. My experience has been that even though the juries are 97 or 8% white people from this area, my experience is they work very, very hard in coming to a just decision based on the facts and circumstances and not on somebody's background.
Obviously, I want to encourage everyone to participate on a jury. It's our civic duty, and it's the foundation of our justice system. Now, from the clip that we just saw, there are two different responses. First, Judge Lopez talks about the economics and how that comes into play with people being able to even serve on a jury. And then also that the jury may not be representative of the community and that their decision is normally unbiased and fair, according to Judge Walker. So I'd like to go to our guests for some clarifications on that and your own perceptions.
Well, when I've been in front of juries, and particularly if I've had the opportunity to talk to juries afterwards, one thing that's always impressed me is how conscientious they are and how seriously they take their jobs, and also how intelligent they are in terms of working together, really taking their civic duties seriously and going over the facts of the case. And they, it's really encouraging, even though I agree that there are filters and flaws as with any system. But ultimately, it's one of the great hallmarks of our democracy, and it's kind of encouraging to see, despite, I guess, these flaws and filters. Yeah,
let's go to the economic part of it. Judge Lopez was talking about how so many people have a difficult time serving on a jury because it is, they take off from their day. Their employers don't pay. So, what can we do about that? Why is it important to give up that?
It's very difficult because you'll see people on both sides of the spectrum have problems with it too. The people who can't afford and the people who feel like their job is too important to leave at the same time. So you kind of get this middle ground. It's difficult to say. I think, how can we fix that? That's a fundamental change in how the system is, because I think now it's $40 a day?
It's $25. It's $10 for the first 3 days, and then it goes up to $25.
You go to overtime,
And that's not enough at $10 a day to pay for parking downtown, and so they don't supplement by giving you bus passes. So transportation is on your own and then getting reimbursed.
Right. I mean, it's essentially a volunteer.
It is.
It's volunteering as a civic duty. But it's just that people have to understand that it's the most important. They say there's 3 ways to serve your country, right? You can join the military, you can vote, and you can serve on a jury.
Absolutely.
And at the end of the day, serving on a jury, you are, when you vote for president, you're one of 52 million that voted for X, Y, or Z. When you're on a jury, you're one of 12. It's the most important voice that you'll have as a citizen at that point, the strongest voice that you'll have by putting in a vote. So people have to understand that, if you really want your community to be better, you have to you have to volunteer to do that jury duty. It's tough, But again, I think as Simon was saying, it's so engaging.
It is.
It's so interesting. It's challenging. I love to challenge jurors and get them to believe that they're up for that challenge, to do things that are a little counterintuitive, to engage in the law, but to affect people's lives.
I love that, 1 in 12, that's great.
One thing jurors actually should understand, their employers should understand, is that they cannot be fired for leaving their jobs
Right,
to
they
serve
cannot
jury duty.
be, or in any way punished.
Right.
Absolutely.
They cannot be punished. A school cannot drop you from classes.
That's right.
A professor cannot fail you. You cannot suffer consequences for doing jury duty.
And the way we have it set up in Multnomah County, people get a jury summons that's for 2 days, or in an asterisk, a jury trial, whichever is longer. But most of the time, people serve 1 to 2 days, and then they're not called for a number of years. And I find that jurors don't have a problem serving on short juries. And then it is more difficult for the longer terms, multiple weeks, or even months long trials. But you can find those people. There are more employers that pay up to 10 days a year for jury duty, but after that the pool gets smaller and smaller.
Another question I have too along that same lines is, what happens if you don't speak it, it's not your first language? You're a citizen of the United States. You're entitled to serve on the jury, but it's not English may not be your first language. Should you still serve on a jury?
Yes.
Well, it depends on how bad your English is. If you can't understand the proceedings, then no.
But often people have been here, and that's a question that you would assess with the counsel and the judge. Now, yes, if someone is new to the country and they don't navigate the system well, and they're not going to be able to understand and fully understand the evidence and fully participate in the deliberations, yes. But if you've been in a country for decades, then you're probably not going to get excused from jury service.
Just because you have a
Just
thick
because
accent.
you have a thick accent.
Yeah, I mean, don't you see that too with people? I have a mother who became a citizen only 10 years ago. So when she came here, a lot of people didn't think she understood, but she actually did. Just because she couldn't speak it well doesn't mean she couldn't understand.
So I would say it's a case-by-case basis.
And it's extremely important to do it because
Absolutely.
you don't want, you have to think in the justice system there are civil and criminal cases, right? And so you have people whose lives are being affected in both realms, and many of those people are minorities. And to have them be predominantly not judged by their peers necessarily, but just by the majority, as it were, it has a negative effect because they can't relate to what motivated them for whatever decisions at issue, some of their thought processes, some of their cultural issues that might be off-putting for someone who's not familiar with that. But so it's extremely important for minorities to engage in the jury system.
Well, it might be important, but how do you actually get the individual minority to do it? Like my wife is Korean Japanese. She's a citizen, but she doesn't want to serve on a jury. She feels her language skills aren't strong enough, even though she and I converse in English. But it's just.
I'm going to say that's on her husband to encourage.
But it's also how she's going to feel if she's called for a jury and the experience she's having during the jury panel.
Right.
I feel like I'm in a unique position because I actually sat on a jury about 2 years ago.
Really?
I served.
Actually,
I
they
was
sat you.
on a jury, a civil case, and I ended up being foreperson.
Of course you were.
Wow.
No, but
I'm
I ended
shocked.
up being foreperson because I was told by my fellow jurors that was going to happen. I was kind of delayed getting in. I was the last, next to the last one. And they said, "You're the foreperson." And I said, "Under certain conditions." And it was a wonderful experience. It confirmed everything that I believed about our legal system, the importance of juries, the confidence I had in the jury deliberation process, and it was something I could check off my bucket list as well because I know that it's never going to happen again.
Yeah. No, I've never
I hope it does. I hope it does.
It was a wonderful experience.
I'm sure.
So what I want to say to everyone out there is hopefully the next time you receive a juror summons and you're eligible to participate, we hope that you'll go and exercise your civic duty. I think we should take a look at probably a whole other aspect of race in the law now. Let's talk about the legal profession itself. So let's roll our final clip.
I think as a bar, we need to encourage and we need to mentor promising lawyers of color for positions on the bench.
Most people think of a judge, they think of, an older white male in a robe. And they think of a very traditional path to get there, partner in a law firm or a longtime DA. But I think the lens needs to be different in terms of what qualities can make a good judge, and what qualities do we want to see in the people that are deciding our disputes.
As this country grows more diverse, I think it's going to be more important than ever that we add ethnic backgrounds to the judiciary, to the police department. I mean, as you can see, the recent developments in Ferguson, where the police department is 54 members and only 3 African American members, and the community is 60% African American, that's going to create an automatic conflict in the community.
It is incredibly important that we seek out good people of color to fill these seats and these positions. I would also extend that to our legislature and to our city council.
Cultivating the minority community that we have now and making sure that they're getting to positions of influence and power, getting to the bench so that people can see them, so that they're visible, so that people can say, they look like me and I can do that. I think that's really important.
It should be in high school. People should be, I think, thinking about a legal career, either as a police officer or an attorney or a judge. I think we have to get people real early thinking about becoming involved in the system. So I saw a statistic the other day that by 2050, this country was going to be mostly a majority of people of color. And that's going to create quite a new look to America, and I think we need to be ready for that. And we need to start right now in the grammar schools.
Having a diverse legal community it does bring legitimacy to our system. It makes our system better. I think we have a great system, but there's always room for improvement. As these cases are coming into court and the law is being interpreted, it's being interpreted through a social lens and a social context, and I think that needs to be reflective of what society really looks like in order to achieve a just result.
Welcome back. Well, there seems to be 2 strands here from the comments. First, encouraging people from all backgrounds to consider the law as a profession, and second, increasing the diversity on our bench. And I'd like to find out what you think about diversity on the bench, diversity in our profession.
Well, first of all, there's not enough diversity in the bench or diversity in our professions in Oregon. You're not going to get more diversity on the bench unless you have more diversity among the lawyers. And there are certain programs in place, like Portland State University has something called the Explore the Law program. So they have undergraduates that might have not been exposed to lawyers, undergraduates of color who might be the first student that has gone to college in their family, and the idea of becoming a lawyer seems like unfathomable to them. And so there's an encouragement to show them that lawyers are actual real people, and to mentor them and to bring them up and to encourage them to actually go into the law so they can bring back some of the power that lawyers can yield. Or Oregon State Bar has the OLIO, the Opportunities of Law in Oregon program, which traditionally was for racial minorities, but now has opened up to people who are from diverse backgrounds. So regardless of your race, if you're the first person that has ever gone to college, or if you come from a different socioeconomic background, then that's something that's considered as well, just to help diversity all across the board.
Simon, do you think that's helped you? You're a big leader in our community. Were you influenced by some of those programs?
No, because I went to law school in New York.
But you've come back now and you teach at those programs. Don't you inspire others?
I seriously doubt
He
that.
absolutely
I'm only there to
does.
entertain. I'm
He's
not
just
really
being
there
humble.
to.
But also, there are one of the things that we are trying to do too, because Simon and I have worked in the what we call the specialty bars or the minority bars, is we also try to recruit students from other states. When you live in New York, or Simon who went to school in New York, it is so diverse that you almost don't think about it. And if you're a person of color and you were applying to a school there, you almost don't, it doesn't affect you because you're going to see many people. And it'll be representative of the population span. And then you come to Oregon and you hear these kind of stories, and you can't change it unless you change it, right? You can't, so we need people who are willing to encourage people of diverse backgrounds to come here, because it is a great place to live. It is a great place to practice. There are people that will welcome them into the practice. And there are some diverse background judges. We do need more, but it is an effort. It's an effort like doing the PSU, like Olio. I've actually been on the phone with potential law students who had been admitted to a law school here from another state with a diverse background, to try to encourage them, because I came from another state. So there is a lot of work to do with that.
And also, even younger than college, there are a number of programs to encourage students of color to consider law as a potential career path. They can be involved through the Classroom Law Project in their various mock trials to try it on, if you will,
debate,
to see,
the constitutional debate program.
We have national champions.
And see if that's something that you're skilled in. Everyone likes to talk and everyone likes to win arguments, so you learn different skills. I mean, there are a number of programs that have been throughout the Portland Public School and the greater Oregon community. But for instance, in a professionalism group that I'm in, an Inn of Court that's based on the English system, we have adopted Jefferson High School, and we have a mock trial program there. There's one at Franklin. There are at other schools that are not traditionally one of those elite schools where you cannot, where you can have the same access as other students. And I think that opens it up. Exposure is a huge factor, as well as seeing someone who looks like you. You
Visualization.
You don't have to have a personal relationship with that person, but if someone looks like you, it opens up at least the possibility it could be you too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
If
And
every lawyer you see is white, then that's going to be like that's not a door that's open to me. But the fact that you have people of color that do participate.
Here.
Yeah.
It's a great representation.
And that's
the
what
12
we were
people watching this
talking-
program are really going to be very influenced.
Come on,
I'm sure.
No, but when we were talking earlier about our history, and I was saying that I felt kind of blessed. My father's a criminal defense attorney, and I had met a bunch of other Hispanic attorneys and black attorneys and Asian attorneys. And then, so I think coming to Oregon, I've realized that they don't really have that here as much. And how important that really is to provide to young, high school students, middle school students, to see a black judge, to see Hispanic judges, to see Asians, being partners at law firms or working at high-ranking spots with the governor or, at the city. That it's important to say that, people that look like me, that talk like me, that like the same food that I do, get to great places. And I can too. And whether or not they say that to themselves, just the hope is again that visualization. They may not know it, but it will help them start believing that, whether or not they're told it or not. They just need to see it.
The one caveat: no one should go to law school unless they want to be a lawyer.
Absolutely, because it's a lot of work.
Without much gain for
And
some
young
of us.
people, would you say, Judge Nelson, young people can come visit?
Anytime.
Welcome. Isn't the courthouse open?
The courthouse is a public building, and all of our proceedings are open to the public. If there is something of a sensitive nature where we think that it's not appropriate for certain age groups, we will put a sign up on our door. Otherwise, from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, you can come to my courtroom anytime and observe what's going on. Well, I just think it's really important for us to say that not every person of color who's a lawyer or every person of color who's a legal professional may feel that they want to give back or give of themselves because they're managing their own individual lives, which can be a handful for all of us anyway. But those of us who are around the table that want to give and will give, those are the people you access. And it's not because they're trying to further their careers or have someone necessarily think that they're great or not. It's because we believe in the greater good. And we're trying to make this Portland, Oregon better.
Yes. Yes, I agree. So I know we've tried to cover a lot of ground today in our discussions, but I'd like to ask each of our panelists what their hopes are for the future, kind of segueing into that now. So maybe Simon, start with you. What's your hope for the future?
You just hope things are going to get better. I mean, I think despite the fact that we have problems and we're not there yet, you see through history it's just an incremental betterment. I mean, I don't think there's a greater illustration of that in what's happening in gender equality right now. There is this backlash, and that's always going to be, that minorities are giving special treatment, or that the whites are being kind of hunted down or something like that. And it's like, you just hope that the Enlightenment, where we have an understanding that we get enriched by diversity, is something that pervades society. But maybe that's idealistic, but that's what I hope.
Well, you got to have that.
Absolutely.
And I think the hope for the future is I feel like the news, we've reached that 50-year mark from the civil rights legislation.
50 years this year.
And there's a sense that things have changed in the public discourse in terms of the tolerance for hate has gone down drastically in our country. And and I think the discussion about the effect of the drug war, I'm seeing things that I feel like I'm latching onto as positive, that people are talking about the sentencing guidelines, they're talking about the drug war, the gender equality is a domino that's just gone, it looks like it's absolutely inevitable in terms of same-sex marriage, for instance. And so
that's the next civil rights movement.
Right, and it really is. And I'm very hopeful that some changes are made, and that the discourse changes to where, again, I think, as you were saying, Simon, that diversity is an enrichment. It's a qualification. It makes our institutions better. It makes our cities better. It makes our food better. It makes the things that we enjoy better.
It does.
It makes our art better, and people need to see that it shouldn't just be for the things that you find interesting in life. Diversity should be in every part of our institution, so that it has a holistic effect for all of us. So I'm hopeful for that, though. I think one day at a time, but I think it's going in the right direction.
And I too am hopeful, as I do a variety of professional activities. Most recently, I served on American Bar Association Commission on Disability Rights, where I educated myself about a whole nother area of people who have been disenfranchised, and how inspired I am by the strength and their tenacity to move forward in a lot of insurmountable odds. I see the commonalities as different groups throughout the year. Our history have been, that's the issue on women. This is the issue on blacks that may encompass other areas. This is immigration. This is same sex. When we realize that we are more the same than different, and that the differences are an enhancement, it's an enrichment, and that we all are working toward the same goal, that we can make this a better place. And also acknowledging that we understand that the legal system is not without its flaws. It's imperfect, but it's the best legal system in the world, and we need to work together to improve it.
Thank you. Thank you all for your insights and for sharing your experiences with us today. It's very much appreciated. Well, we've still got plenty to discuss, but we must draw to a close. So I want to thank my guests once again. Yes, we have come a long way, but in order for our legal system to be truly reflective of the communities they serve, we must encourage diversity and engage people in our legal system. Our nation is only going to grow more diverse, and now it is more important than ever that we inspire each other to build a system that embodies these principles. In essence, and I'm going to take these words from Judge Nelson, a more inclusive, a more just, and a more perfect union. I'm Bonnie Richardson. Thank you for watching Legal Logic.